the Lies Radio, part of the Cast 'Em Off Ministries Network.
Welcome to Fight the Lies Radio. I'm Mike.
And I'm Kelly.
And we want to thank everyone for taking the time to tune in and listen today or tonight or whatever place and space time you may find yourself. And, you know, time is the most valuable commodity in the universe. So we definitely appreciate you giving us a chance and listening. And also, we want to thank Brandon Schwinn of Cast 'Em Off Radio, who has invited us to join the network of Cast 'Em Off Ministries. We recently spoke with him separately, and this has sort of launched us into this, and we just really appreciate the opportunity.
Yes. Again, thank you very, very much, Brandon. And what we are going to do, we're going to cover a host of topics in podcasts of the future, such as what we see going on in a lot of churches and Messianic synagogues, anything dealing with the New Apostolic Reformation, with certain prayer practices that are going on that are honestly occultic based. Refuting, what we see as false teachings in a lot of these places within the churches and within the Messianic synagogues, occult symbolism in the media, the way that the media is feeding lies to the general populace. And the reason that we wanted to do this, we did speak to Brandon. We both had our own separate testimonies. One's is far longer than the other, but that's okay. But we would appreciate it if you care to take the time out to check out our testimonies. They are my husband's is actually very, very powerful. And yes, it is lengthy, but trust me, it is very much worth listening to. But we've been through a lot of these things. We both had a lot of experiences, and especially with spiritual abuse and dealing with a very cultic place that, well, we're going to have to admit it is a cult. So we just want to, get this information out and give our thoughts and give encouragement to you guys.
Sure. And I think that, maybe perhaps we're suited to do this because, you can't talk about something unless you've lived it. Mm-hmm. Not honestly. Yeah. I mean, there's people who approach people all the time who attempt to tell them about this, that, or the other. Like, for example, someone who's never drunk a drop of alcohol in their lives tries to go up to someone and tell them they shouldn't drink. Well, how do they know anything about it? But if, as someone who perhaps did have a drinking problem, which I personally didn't, but if I come up to someone from that point of view and tell them, hey, this is what I went through, that's a lot more effective, a lot more powerful. And so us, we believe that the things that we went through, however good or bad they were, we can in part redeem them by doing something like this very podcast. You have an insight into things when you've lived them, not something you can gain from books or a website or a podcast even, mm-hmm. but it's something you've seen, experienced, felt, and that makes it real. And so that's where we've just felt led to go to, and so many conversations we've had in our own lives with so many people. And obviously listening to our testimonies, you would very thoroughly understand why, because of someone's aforementioned very lengthy testimony.
And lengthy testimony is not exactly a bad thing. It just means that you've lived a fairly full life up until this point, and there's just so much more to come that we know for us and for everyone else. And really, what we want to do is, like I said earlier, is just really give encouragement to a lot of folks who are going through the same things that we did. And as Mike gave his very, very wonderful example, it is very hard to hear somebody talking about something that they've never been through before. And so we hope that this podcast series is just going to be a huge blessing to y'all. And we know that it is a very, very big blessing to us, and especially to have been able to give our testimonies. And, sometimes it can be a difficult thing because When you go through a lot of rough patches in your life, a lot of trials and tribulations, especially that test your faith so hard, you just smush those things down inside and you don't really want to bring them back up. But it's very healing and very freeing to be able to do that and to, most of all, lean on God and trust in Him to walk with you and to give you the words to, in giving your testimony and to touch you and to heal you, to clean you of all that stuff, even while you're talking. And it's just an amazing, wonderful thing. And we're both very, very thankful that we have been given the opportunity to share our experiences with Brandon and with so many of you who have heard it or hopefully will hear the testimonies. And there's just so much that we have planned out in this, and we would appreciate prayers and getting everything organized and getting this rolling. And we know that the first podcast is the most difficult.
Yes, and we want to thank everyone for bearing with us, and you may be coming to realize by the end that you really did have to bear with us. Because this is the first time we've done this. Mm-hmm. And
it's not scripted either.
No, not at all. I don't think scripting is a very good thing. Nope. I'd probably stumble through it anyways and mess it up. But I think, we should probably talk a little bit more about ourselves a bit and how we got to this point without going into any epic 5-hour stories or anything. Me, I grew up in the 80s and the 90s. And for anyone who grew up in the 80s, we really had a lot of bad examples for what we saw as being Christianity. I mean, you had the televangelist and all the scandals that went on in the 80s with, money and with people cheating on their spouses and all these different things that came out. And for me personally, I always saw that and viewed it like, well, those people represent God, and I have a basic understanding of what the Bible says we are and we're not supposed to do. And to me, it seemed like, well, everything I'm seeing is in opposition to that. And you come to the conclusion that, well, that's what this is. So that means the whole thing's a lie. So, I went through most of my formative years, my teens and my 20s, really not wanting anything to do with Christianity because it didn't seem very appealing to me based on all the examples I saw. And, and as time went on, I got curious about different spiritualities and different belief systems and philosophies. And I've always been rather analytically minded and always had an appreciation for science and physics and all those sorts of things. So, in the early days of the internet, I spent much time just investigating different things that were out there, and that goes through the spectrum of traditional religious beliefs to the paranormal, to the new age, to, all the things you hear about aliens and all those sorts of things. And I sort of had this messed up melting pot of belief systems through, most of my 20s and going into my 30s. And eventually through happenstance, and you will hear more details on that story if you listen to our testimonies. Not that we're trying to get you to listen to our testimonies, but I, through happenstance, met Kelly, and we met online. And it was one of those things that I knew right away. This is the woman I'm supposed to be with. And never thought that would happen. Didn't really want it to happen, to be honest. I always said I would never get married. But I met Kelly, and within a very short order, we decided to get married. And we both had our baggage from our old lives. And we ended up really hitting sort of a crisis mode in our marriage a couple years in. And we finally came to the realization that we needed spiritual help. So we found a congregation we started attending, and it was a Messianic congregation. Messianic Judaism, it's basically, the origins were essentially Jewish people who decided that Yeshua, Jesus, is the Messiah. And this goes back to the 70s. And as time went on, it became more of a majority of non-Jewish people coming into Messianic Judaism, where I would say today the average Messianic congregation is probably, it's safe to say, it's 80% Gentile, 20% Jewish. And that's probably on the high end as far as Jewish attendance goes. It's probably lower on average, but there's a number for you. Well, it was also very hyper charismatic. And I really didn't have much of a background in anything. Like I said, I had this big messed up mixing pot. And so I just sort of took everything I heard as, choosing to accept that it was true, even though a lot of the things I heard really went against conclusions I had come to. But I always sort of told myself, well, these people are older and more mature in the faith than me, so they know better. So I'm going to set aside what I think I know and embrace what they're telling me. Well, as time went on, and this is probably one of the key reasons why I feel moved to do a podcast. As time went on, I started listening to podcasts. Now, this was in the early days of podcasting, 2005, 2006. And have to give a shout out to Derek and Sherrick Gilbert with View from the Bunker and Peering into Darkness Radio, because those were two of the first people I started listening to who were talking about a lot of the same issues that we're talking about right now. The New Apostolic Reformation, Dominionism, things of that nature, all the teachings that are coming out of that. And these are the things I was being taught. So I had this cognitive dissonance that I just sort of ignored probably for the better part of 2 years. 3 years, really. And then things sort of came to a head where I was forced to decide, okay, what's the truth? And certain events happened that basically forced me to choose, because if one thing is for certain with me, amidst all my confusion, and that one thing is that I have to have the truth. And it drives me crazy if I don't. So the evidence weighed on the side of the truth being outside of what I was being taught in this congregation. Well, things came to a head. We finally sort of voiced our concerns, and things went south, and we finally decided, hey, it's time to get out. We left this congregation, and we sort of floated around for a while, feeling unsafe to go anywhere, found another place, another Messianic congregation. It was a safe place. It was a kind place, but not really sort of fully where we felt like we should be either. So through that and the fact that we've had changes in life with moving and things like that, we discontinued attending there. And you know, we've tried a few places since then. And one thing I've found to be true is that it's exceedingly difficult to find a good, sound, biblically based congregation that both teaches the truth and has the right heart. So I think that that is part of where we're both at with this podcast as well. Is one of the reasons we want to address the false teachings that are out there, is because it's so predominant out there. It's so many congregations, and you can't really bash any particular denomination for being particularly bad, because there are so many flaws at so many. And yeah, that's normal and that's natural. We're always going to have flaws, but there are those that are becoming massive today, that if you are to decide that you want to be an honest, sincere, biblical believer, let's forget about labels, Christianity, or I'm Pentecostal, or I'm Baptist, or I'm Messianic, or whatever. Let's just say biblical believer. It's very difficult to say, I'm a biblical believer and attend a lot of the places that are out there today. Well, I'm going to draw to a close on my monologue here because I think I've gone on a fairly lengthy amount of time, and I think my wife might have some things to add.
Yeah, actually, I do. In the first Messianic congregation that we went to, and we were there for about 5.5 years, there was a whole lot of legalism, and unfortunately, there was also a lot of spiritual abuse there. And basically, spiritual abuse is like any other type of abuse, except that Scripture is used to back up and to justify the actions of the abuser. And it just made it really hard for us. And when I was growing up, I grew up and a lot, I dealt with a lot of spiritual abuse, and it was very, very hard for me. But it was basically, you have to believe that the pastor is infallible and that he is, he has a direct line to God, and the rest of us are just mere mortals. We're nowhere near as holy as he is. And so don't you dare question him. Don't you dare question the Bible either, or ask, is or so. And it's either because God said so, or because the pastor said so, or because the Bible said so. There were no good answers. And so, we're hoping to be able to provide answers that are necessary, because it's okay to be a Christian and to question things. In fact, you actually, you should. And especially if something doesn't feel right to you, doesn't seem right to you. But I really believe that a lot of these false doctrines and these false teachings go hand in hand with legalism. They're basically man-made rules that are enforced upon the congregants, and anyone who disagrees with it is met with that abuse. They're called worthless, or they're stupid, or they're in sin. So many things. They're threatened with being thrown out of the church, with public humiliation. And with us, with that first Messianic congregation that we left, our names have been dragged through the mud because, God showed us what was going wrong, and we dared to speak out against it and speak up against it. And, even dared to stand up to the rabbi and his wife, and they did not take kindly to it. And that's okay with us. That's okay, with me. Now, admittedly, we still have some bitterness left over from that. And I think especially with a lot of the people in that congregation that we thought were our friends that are no longer our friends because they are too afraid of the rabbi and his wife to come near us. Because what happened, and we experienced this when other people had left, and not in the good graces of the rabbi and his wife, but they would talk about those people who had left and would tell us to watch them if they ever came back, and report to us what they're doing and all this stuff. Don't associate with them. So that's what happened with these people, the folks that we thought were our friends. And despite us having, to at least a couple of them, having given our side of the story, our friends knew both sides, but they still left us. And so that, that really hurts. And we served directly under the rabbi and his wife. We were their armorbearers. And so it has made us very cautious when we do find a good church with biblical teachings and good worship. We're very hesitant to join, because joining, we know we'll need to serve, and we're, very, very hesitant of that. And it's been almost 6 years since we left, almost 6 years since all of this went down, and we're still in the process of healing, but we're grateful that we've come to the point where we've actually desired to find a new place and have a new spiritual family.
Something that came to my mind as you were talking, I felt the need to explain something. Kelly made mention of Armorbearers. Well, one of the ministries we were involved in was the security ministry. And I am, to this day, a firm believer that in a church or a synagogue, a place of worship, that in this day and age, with all the reports we hear in the news of attacks happening in places of worship, and trust me, there are many you don't hear about, that they don't make national headlines. Maybe it's just a local headline. Maybe it's just swept under the rug. Well, anyways, there is a great need to have that. Now, to what degree, what form it takes, that could be debatable. That can depend upon what is really called for in your place and in your city. But in our place, we were trained security, both unarmed and armed. And there was another sort of category in that, at least in our training and approach to it, it had a term called an armorbearer. And what that was someone who is individually committed to being essentially a bodyguard for a person in leadership.
Almost like the Secret Service with the president.
Yeah, that's sort of how it plays out. I actually went through multiple classes on that. And this includes stuff like even going out to locations that person may be visiting, to vet them, to hotels that they may be staying at, going through the buildings, making sure, everything seems in order. I mean, and it also included things beyond just being a bodyguard, so to speak. It also included just being an assistant. And, in theory, it was a very close relationship that you're to have and a certain level of trust on both people's parts. Now, in our experience, the trust really sort of only went one way, it would seem, because, in hindsight, we found out that we really weren't too trusted. And I mean, and not to get too deep into it, but when we got to that point, that was when Kelly started having things said to her by the rabbi's wife that were directed against me. And this caused conflict between us. Now, mind you, we didn't have the communication going on to where, at that point, to where she had felt safe telling me, hey, these things are being said to me. These things just came out from her to me sort of less directly. And I took it as just a personal attack coming from her versus the reality, which was a personal attack coming from the rabbi's wife through her. And that was all part of the situation that led to the explosive event that instigated our leaving. Well, anyways, and this is really one thing that, one big part of our life, of course, and it's affected a lot of things in our lives, and it's certainly something we have a heart for dealing with, because we talk to people so often that have been abused in congregations, who maybe they didn't even get a chance to really find a home there because they were rejected shortly after attending, or maybe they've been there a long time and they got abused like us. Or people who've had illnesses that get told in a congregation that they don't have enough faith and that's why they're ill, or they lose their job and they're told, well, you didn't have enough faith. That's why you lost your job. That's why your household is falling apart, and all these sorts of things. Or they have emotional problems, depression or whatever, and they're told, well, you don't have enough faith. You're not in a close enough relationship with God. That's why you have this problem. All these different things. Me and Kelly both engage in conversations with people we're friends with, people we meet online, whatever. And it's something we both, at least in our lives, have seen is such a massive problem, and people aren't really talking about it. I mean, not enough. And so I guess that's why this is now and will be a very big topic for us. And there are plenty of other things. I mean, we both, because of our backgrounds with dabbling in other spiritualities and other things, there's other things that we both, through those experiences and through things we've learned from others, we see in the world that, some people talk about. I don't think it's probably talked about enough, or certainly not talked about enough in the right context for us, in a biblical context. Things like paranormal things. People talk, how many shows are there about hauntings and ghosts and all that? But how many shows are there that talk about it from a biblical view? Now, the problem is when you hear about it in a church, they automatically want it to sort of just get it out of the way real quick and say, it's just demons and that's it. And we're not going to talk about it. Those people are just, deceived, and let's move on. But at least on this topic, for example, if one looks at the Greek in the New Testament, the word is actually daemon, which does not tell you anything specific that would say this is a fallen angel, which is how people generically use the word demon. The word daemon means essentially a spirit. And, there is a belief in some biblical views that what we would describe as demons are actually the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim of Genesis 6, and that was part of their curse to be locked here on earth, and these disembodied spirits, and that this is one facet of what we see in the New Testament with people being possessed by these things. But there's also room in that translation of daemon to include the disembodied spirits of human beings. Now, obviously, those disembodied spirits would not be people who have accepted Yeshua as the Messiah and have eternal salvation, because when we do that, we are now with God. We're not here locked on earth, as we pass on from this life. But those who don't have salvation, maybe those who've done certain things in lives, I don't know. I mean, the Bible's not specific on it, so we can't make a solid case on it to say that this is an absolute truth, but there is room for it to be a possibility. And so the point being is that this is a sort of topic that needs to be talked about, because people are experiencing these things. And yeah, it's one certain level. Does it matter if someone is being attacked by an entity in a house? Does it matter if it's a disembodied spirit of the Nephilim or a disembodied spirit of a human being or whatever? I don't know that it matters. To some degree, they're still being attacked. But I think in some senses it certainly matters, and as far as the level of authority you have to deal with it. The book of Jude talks about not taking certain authority upon yourself to rebuke, angels. We don't have that authority. Michael didn't even do it in regards to the fight over Moses' body with Satan. He said, "May the Lord rebuke you." So I think it's important when we deal with those sorts of things to have that understanding. And of course, that's one of the things that we encountered in the hyper-charismatic teachings, that, people want to run around and, claim authority over this place or this land or these people, and, just sort of take a broad brush and tell everything to get out. And that's sort of a dangerous thing.
That's not sort of a dangerous thing. That is a very, very dangerous thing. Because there's going to be repercussion for doing that. And especially if somebody has absolutely, no training in doing anything like that, they're going to walk in and they're going to think that they can just, tell these demons what to do, tell these spirits what to do. But, those things are powerful compared to us. And so, they're pretty much going to be laughing in the faces of these people. And, of course, that's when backlash comes. And so these folks are just going in and they're doing things that, they're messing with things that they shouldn't be. And as somebody who was formerly in the occult, I can tell you that's an extremely bad idea.
Yeah. And, it's like, what about the incident in Acts where, the guy's going to try to cast out demons and they think they're doing it in, Jesus' name, but they weren't saved. And then the demons basically beat the snot out of them, and the guys run off with their clothes ripped off, all beat up and everything else. Or, when Yeshua said, if somebody casts a demon out of someone and they don't get cleansed, they don't get themselves filled after being cleansed, with the Holy Spirit, then that demon could come back with 7 other ones worse than themselves. Yeah. And, I see it so much that people they go to some deliverance ministry or they go to some church and, people get up and they lay their hands on them, and maybe they, dump anointing oil on them, or, they say a certain prayer over them or whatever. And then nothing else is done. I mean, the person feels better and they're happy and they feel free and they leave. And then basically all it's expected is for them to just sort of keep coming regularly to church or something. But even at that, there's not a lot of follow-up. I mean, some of those people, I've seen it happen to where they leave and then maybe they don't show up 2 weeks later. It's not like anybody's going out checking up on them. And people generally sort of take this, I mean, I'm sorry for saying it, but they sort of take this callous, arrogant point of view that like, well, they didn't show back up. That must mean they fell off the wagon. Yeah. And, you know, well, that's what happens. And, you know, if we're supposed to be out there fighting and saving people while we're not doing the saving, let's not get that wrong. It's Yeshua that's doing the saving. But if we're leading them to him and we're supposed to be helping them get to him, then what's that say for us if we just sort of take that attitude?
Yeah, exactly. You know, you're supposed to, you know, we're to take care of each other. That's exactly what we're supposed to do, and, you know, hold each other accountable in, you know, all things. And, you know, one thing that has turned me off about some places is that, you know, you're not checked on. People don't come to, you know, see if you're okay. And, you know, if you're a member, and if it's especially in a small place and you've had a procedure done, a medical procedure done, or you've been sick for a bit, there's very few people that will call to check up on you. And especially when it's the ministers who don't do it, that can be hurtful to people. Now, you know, you got to take into consideration that, you know, they're going to be busy, yes, but when nobody bothers to call you, to check up on you, to see how you're doing, to see if you need anything, you know, that can be a big turnoff. And a lot of churches, I think, are just more concerned with numbers than with anything else. They're not concerned with taking care of people. They're not concerned with getting out there and getting on the streets and ministering to the needs of, you know, the public, of the people. They're just concerned. They're enveloped in their own little bubbles in these churches, and they just, all they want to do is just get up as many the members as they can, just so they look good. And then, of course, the money comes pouring in from the tithes and the offerings, and there are some pastors who will berate their congregants and shame them into giving more money than they can afford. And, you know, that, of course, leads to bigger buildings and, you know, more for the, you know, pastors. But that's not a common occurrence. I want to say that is not a common occurrence, but it has happened and is happening in some churches. And it's just, you know, it's not right. It's become a den of vipers. All I can think of is when Jesus went up to the temple and there were all the money changers there, and it was basically like a marketplace going on, and he was flipping tables and, you know, cracking whips at people, and just, he was very angry. And you know, I wonder what he would think of what's going on today in a great majority of the churches.
Well, yeah, and it's not just that. It's, you know, it's just sort of the and I think it's a problem, obviously, more broadly with our culture and our society at large. We have this very self-centric, if that's a proper phrase, view that, you know, we're very selfish and we're very self-centered. Yeah. And I think, you know, as Kelly was talking about earlier, when someone has a surgery or an illness and no one comes out, well, maybe the people within might say, well, that person should be relying on God. They should be getting their peace and comfort and joy and healing from God. Yeah, ultimately, yes. But if we weren't meant to do that to some extent for each other, then why on earth did he tell us to not forsake assembling together? Yeah. Why did he tell us to do that? And by the way, that's not about having an official building with an official name, with an official denomination. It's about us as individuals, as families, as friends, coming together to support each other, to come together under an agreed set of teachings, which hopefully are encompassed within the Bible. You know, the reason we have denominations, because there are disagreements on some points. I mean, we can't, though, disagree on the major points, right? What are the major points? Yeshua is God. He came to earth, sinless, into a human body, and he lived a perfect life. And then he died for us. And when you look in that singular moment of time at that act he did and say, my life is chaos, my life is ruined, I cannot do anything to save myself. And then you say my only answer is him in that singular act that he did, and accept that, and him as being God and Lord of your life, your entire existence, not just now temporally speaking, but for all eternity. That's the major. And, and yes, that everything that the Bible claims that it is, believing that that is in fact the truth. Because there is so much out there today that's saying in Christianity, and, I use that term generically. I could, branch off and differentiate between Christianity and Messianic Judaism or whatever else, but let's just be simple and say Christianity. In Christianity today, there's a lot of people questioning those essentials even. Some people will say, well, he wasn't really necessarily fully God, and he was man at one point, and then he was God, and then he was a man again. And well, that's a whole nother crazy realm. That's some of the things that are being taught in, say, the Word of Faith movement. Mm-hmm. But, those are the essentials. And so as long as we can agree on those and we come together, that's what we're told to do. And so I did rabbit trail a bit. My point was that we are told we should not forsake assembling together. And if we, in that assembling together, cannot take the time to care about one another and reach out and support one another, whether that's physical illness or emotional illness or
mental illness,
or, maybe it's a financial problem or whatever it is, then we're kind of negating the whole entire point. Speaking of the financial thing, there's a popular thing today that, we as believers need to be out there in the culture, giving to this charity or this cause or that cause. Now, on one level, there's nothing wrong with that. However, that's not a primary thing, and that's not what we're commanded to do. When the Bible talks about us giving to the poor, us helping widows and orphans, it's in the context, and that's always key, it's in the context of those in the body. That's what we're commanded to do. Again, nothing wrong with helping people outside the body. We should do that. It's obviously a great tool to witness with. But I find the case to be more often that people in the body are being ignored and told that if they just have faith, these things will work out. Yeah. And I think at a certain level, part of that has to do with pride. We want the notoriety of saying that we are out here doing this or that in the world, because the world isn't going to see what we're doing in the body.
Yeah, exactly. And I want to make a caveat here. We are in no way, shape, or form trying to bash churches or trying to bash Christians. That is absolutely not what we're out to do. We're not what do you call them, heresy hunters? But we're not, basically what I'm trying to say is that we're not trying to attack anyone unjustly here. And, this is our passion, and, we're both very passionate for the truth, and we want to make the truth known. We want to make it revealed. And while it may sound that we're being, we may be just unjustly attacking, or maybe we're being cruel, the fact of the matter is we can't have false teachings. We can't have these false doctrines and these other things that are going to crush people's faith. And they're actually, people are no longer having faith in God. They're no longer having faith in Jesus, but they're having faith in themselves. They're having faith in their own power. And a lot of that is within the Word of Faith movement, which is just basically people who think that all they have to do is just continually speak, health or wealth or happiness or whatever into their lives, and God is the vending machine that is going to give it to them. And they don't understand that through trials and tribulations, that is when our faith is strengthened. And whether it's a physical illness or financial issues, whatever that goes on, those times are the ones that sharpen us and strengthen us, for battles to come, so that with every new trial and tribulation, we will, our faith, because our faith is stronger, that we'll be able to get through that, more easily than we would, say if we didn't have faith, if we weren't believers. So I just wanted to throw that caveat in there, because, we both can go on for a while about, so many things that are wrong, but we'll be covering a lot of it more extensively, in the following podcasts. And again, this is just meant to be introductory and just, I guess, glazing over, covering just a little tiny bit of, some of what, we see as well, I'm going to say it, heresy. That's exactly what it is, and blasphemy too. And when Mike was talking about, people not believing that, they're not quite sure now that Jesus was actually God, and that's really serious. That is really serious, and I don't know if that falls under the category of, blasphemy of the Holy Spirit or not, but it is a very, very serious thing. And it definitely proves that the Bible is not being taught in churches anymore. It's man's theories that are being taught in churches. It is, what men think. They think they're above the Bible. They think they're above the inerrant word of God. And, they might even think that they're on par with God themselves, and they're not. And so what we want is to, expose this and to basically, bring it to light and say, hey, this is what's going on. This is why it is wrong. And, here's how you can, do your part in, spreading, awareness about it. And again, I know I said earlier, we're not heresy hunters. That's a very popular term for people like us who are in this, this business of digging in deep and finding the truth and exposing lies. And that's why our podcast is called Fight the Lies, because that's what we felt we're called to do. And, call us whatever you want, but, we're not trying to attack anyone personally, but we are, we are very adamant about finding the truth and speaking the truth and getting it out there and making other believers aware of this, of all these things that are going on within Christian churches and within the Messianic movement itself. And a great deal of it is a lot of pride, in self, and people trying to bring the presence of God into worship by using fog machines. And this is actually something that happens. People will use, fog machines, they'll use lights, whatever they can to, imitate the presence of God. But folks, the truth of the matter is that if we actually felt God's presence, we would die. If we actually heard his voice, we couldn't take it. And so, you may feel the Holy Spirit, you may feel something, but, to feel the presence of God and say, I know the presence of God is in this place is, it's an untruth. And to try to, set up rituals to get it in there is, something that shouldn't be done. And, worship is something that should come from the heart. And, I'm an old-fashioned girl. I really love my hymns, and I feel that those are, for me personally, those are more heartfelt than a lot of the contemporary Christian worship I've seen that has, verses repeated over and over again. It gets kind of boring. It gets kind of dull and difficult to deal with. Now that's, you might not think that. You might hate hymns and prefer contemporary worship. And, that's okay. We're all different. We all have our own tastes. But just for people to set up, ritualistic processes in the church to attempt to have, daily miracles and things, of that nature, miracles, signs, and wonders to happen it upsets me to see it, because, we did a lot of that in witchcraft, and we basically thought that we could the spirits can control everything. And how it is in Word of Faith and these other movements, they believe that they can control God, that they can tell him what to do, and they actually dare to command him in healing people or in restoring, financial status or whatever. And we don't want to see this happening. We really don't. And the reason that we're alerting others to this is so that they can see, hopefully their eyes will be opened, and then they will see that this is wrong, that they will see that this is not right, that this is not what God wants, and that they will turn away from walking down a potentially very dangerous, spiritually dangerous path, and they will turn from that and they will turn towards God.
And I had a couple thoughts here that I think we need to define our terms and where we're coming from. When Kelly was speaking about presence and the presence of God or the voice of God and those sorts of things. Now we are speaking from a Old Testament point of view, if you will, because we often throw around that term here, hearing from God, hearing the voice of God, or feeling the presence of God. And there is a distinction. Some people, when they say that, all they mean is in their heart, in their spirit, they're feeling impressed upon them something from God. And so they will say, I heard from God. I don't disagree with that. Now, we could maybe get a little bit more precise with our terminology and the phrases we use. But, let's not butt heads over that. But there are some people who say they heard from God or they felt the presence of God, and they mean quite literally they heard an audible voice of God, or they saw a manifestation in the physical realm of God. And looking at it from an Old Testament point of view, that was extraordinarily rare. The only people documented in the Old Testament to see a physical manifest presence of God, you could probably count on one hand. You got Moses, you got Aaron, you got, of course, the children of Israel coming out of Egypt. They saw a manifestation of God, but none of them saw God's actual body. What did God say to Moses when he begged him to see his face? He said, no, if you see me, you'll die. And he hid Moses, in the cleft of the rock so that he could just see the backside of his leg as he passed by. So that's what we mean when we talk about that. So again, like Kelly said earlier, I want to echo, we're not saying that everybody who says, I feel the presence of God in here is wrong. We're saying in the context of that's where we delineate. And, going back to something she was pointing out with some worship services at some places, there are places that actually do bring in fog machines and things like that. And I've witnessed it and I've heard other people say it, where the populace within that congregation, they're not necessarily given the information that, hey, we got a fog machine we're going to turn on here during worship. This thing will be turned on. And then at some point, someone will make a reference to saying, hey, I sense the presence of God in here, or there's a manifestation happening right now. So you as a worshiper, you stand there and you got your eyes closed and you're into it, and you open your eyes and you see this foggy haze in the room. How are you supposed to interpret it? Now, did someone point their finger at that and say, hey, it's the manifest presence of God to lie to you and make you believe that? No, but they definitely implied it and they set you up for that. That's the sort of thing she's talking about. Yeah. And, whether it's by happenstance or not, it's a very, very questionable thing to do. One of the problems, speaking of worship, is that I think at a certain level, we get it very wrong when it comes to worship. Primarily, what's worship supposed to be for? It's for God. Yeah. It's not for us. It's not about how we feel about it, an emotional being stirred in us, or us walking away happy and smiling and everything else. You may walk away from worship feeling broken and in tears and a mess and doubting everything in your life. But maybe the one thing you don't doubt is God. And maybe in that worship, you you had that impressed on you about maybe certain aspects of your life or the world in general. Point being, though, that it's not all about how you feel. Certain worship music, it's very centered around us, ourselves, our feelings. And, some people have a problem with what we see in modern worship music of this phenomenon of very, for lack of better terms, a very sensual aspect to it in regards to us and our relationship with God. And to that, I would say that where in the New or Old Testament do we ever see that sort of relationship engaged between us and God or us and Yeshua? When Yeshua was walking with the disciples here on earth, there was never any hint of this sort of relationship going on. There was a friendship. There was a teacher and his students. There was a leader and his followers, and that was it. So, quite a few people, myself included, who have a problem with that sort of aspect of what's called worship today. Well, do we have any more topics to hit on that we can really by chance offend people heavily with?
I don't think we do, not right now. Anyway, it would probably be best left for another podcast.
Now, I think we can move on from that realm, and there's other topics that we just kind of wanted to just shoot out there that we would, look forward to covering, and hopefully more upcoming episodes. Things like, me personally, I pay a lot of attention to current events and things that are going on in the world. And I think we need to, with a biblical worldview, I think we need to look at what's going on in the political realm, in the scientific realm, and conflicts that are going on around the world. And we need to not focus on them with fear or worry or even necessarily looking for the fulfillment of prophecy. But we need to just be aware of the times and the things that are going on. And, if for no other reason than that, hey, we as believers, we got the answer. We know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And yet, all the rest of the world, they're looking at these things. And there's going to come a point in time where the vast majority of people are going to be scared to death. And they're going to be looking for answers. And we need to be able to give them to them. But better yet, even today, before the chaos comes, we need to be able to look at certain things and explain to people, hey, this is what this is, and this is potentially where this is going. Like, for example, many people talk about chips being implanted and, the idea of the mark of the beast. That's a pretty commonly talked about topic. But, others talk about transhumanism and the things that are being done with cloning and with, augmentation with technology or with altering our very DNA, and how that is leading up to fulfillment of potentially of certain biblical prophecies. And, it's a sort of thing that, there's people talking about it, but once again, as I said earlier, not enough people are talking about it. And, I love technology. I love science. I wanted to be an astronaut as a kid, and I'd still love to be one today. And if I could pick my career right now, I'd love to be a physicist. So I will never say that science and technology are bad things in and of themselves. It's what you do with them.
Yeah, exactly.
And that goes to another point with the seeming conflict we have between the Bible and science. It's not a conflict. The conflict is, what do you interpret from the data? If you look at data that's acquired through observation, which is what science is, and then you come to a conclusion that say, oh, this universe came to be from random chance through a set of events that played out following the Big Bang, and it's all part of a multiverse, and it just all happened just by sheer chance, then that's one thing. Another person could take that same data and say, well, look, the event was triggered by God. God spoke it into being, and everything that we see flowing out of that is by design. The whole point is that people are taking the same data, interpreting it two different ways. It does not mean the data is bad. It means the interpretation's bad. So therefore, science is not in conflict with religion.
Yeah.
It's the religion of science that's in conflict with the religion of the Bible.
Yeah, I agree.
What are some other topics? Entertainment, music?
Entertainment, music, especially the occultic messages that are contained therein. I'm going to be going more in depth into that. And one of my favorite things, and it's one is actually starting next week. It's the first one of the year, and that is the feast days. Now, a lot of people call these the Jewish holidays. They're not Jewish holidays. They are God's holy days that we are to treat as a Shabbat. And if you want to learn, if you want to see where that comes from, it's Leviticus 23, which has every single one of God's high holy days in it. And these are very precious and very important to us. And we will be covering these as they come along and explaining exactly why these feast times are so important. And also, for those of you who may not know, letting you in that Jesus himself, Yeshua himself, celebrated these high holy days. And they're very, very wonderful. They're very, very significant. And basically, we both really, truly believe Jesus is the fulfillment of all of these, all these feast times. And we believe that in eternity with the Lord, we will be celebrating these times. And so I'm really looking forward to covering Passover, because that is my favorite. And there's other topics. I'm probably going to go in a little more into legalism too. Yes.
Oh, and speaking of legalism and what you were just mentioning, I want to clarify that we both came from a point of view formerly in our former congregation that the feast days were what we should be celebrating, and all of those pagan Christian traditions are bad and people shouldn't be doing them. Yeah. And we so got checked on that.
Yeah, we do not feel that way.
And I say you could do both.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. My point of view is that if you are going to do one, for example, say Christmas, that's a big controversial one, right?
Yeah.
Then if that's what you believe and that is what you're honoring his birth by doing, then that's awesome. However, there's a certain richness, a certain just wonderful thing you could get from looking at the biblical feast days and seeing God's pattern in those, and how his plan for creation, for redemption, for deliverance is played out in those feast days.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's the worth in celebrating them. And if you don't do it, guess what? It's fine. It's not like he's telling us we got to do them.
Yeah.
And they're not for his sake. That's one of the problems and mistakes I think a lot of people in the Messianic movement, and also in what's known as the Hebrew Roots movement, which is a whole nother mess. That's one of their mistakes. They look at it as if they're doing this for God, and it's this thing and you got to do it. And if you don't do it, then you're sinning. And they're really missing out on the whole point of it. Mm-hmm. And I know when I was approaching it from that point of view, I really didn't, I'm not going to say I never did, but most of the time I did not have much joy in it, because I was too worried about the details, and I was too worried about getting things right and doing everything just the right time and in just the right way. Anyways, I think we are going to tie things up here. We've hit about an hour, and I think that's enough for an introduction podcast.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to add?
Nothing else. Nothing that I have off the top of my head.
Well, we want to just say thanks again for listening and bearing with us. Hopefully we did not ramble and rant off too much on too many rabbit trails. One of us is sort of known to do that. I won't say who. Myself. And we just look forward to doing more shows and really hoping that we get to hear from people out there. I mean, we're not really quite sure everything we're going to do with this crazy thing here. We would like, hopefully at some point, to maybe, if people feel the desire to give their testimonies, or just maybe just come on and do an interview and talk about certain topics. That's something I think we'd both be interested in too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I mean, who knows? We'll include our contact information and the details of the show. And, well, I think that's about all I have.
That's all, folks.
You got to stop me because I'm going to just keep rambling here.
No, where's the duct tape? No, we thank you for listening to us. We really, really do appreciate this. And again, I promise you, we're not trying to attack anybody. But we love you all, and we hope you have a blessed night.
Fight the Lies Radio is a production of Fight the Lies Ministries. Visit us at ftlradio.net. This program is released under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. Intro and outro music by Kevin MacLeod at incompetech.com.